assembly, there are several different things that I wanted to point out. Once again, you may or may not have known about, but hopefully if you didn't, it'll be helpful for your design process. The first one deals with just the simple act of including the first item in an assembly. It doesn't really matter what it is. In this case, I have several sub-assemblies, or what will be sub-assemblies, already open, so I'll just use one of those. But when you select one and you bring it in, really, a lot of people just click and they place it. And some people will then go back in and maybe right-click on that component, float it, mate it wherever they want it to be, whether that's to the assembly planes or the origin or something like that, or whatever it might be. And then they'll go in and then right-click and fix it back in space. To save you some time on that front, what you can do is simply click the green check. So notice as I hover over the green check, it snaps. What it's doing is snapping the component origin to the assembly origin. So all of your planes and everything are already aligned. So here's my component origin right here. And then if I click on my assembly origin, it's in the same spot. My right plane and my right plane are aligned, top plane and top plane are aligned, etc. So it places that nicely right off the bat. So that's a nice one to know about, just to save you some time if that was your process before. Okay. In the next example, I'll show you some things to do with exploded views. So in case you aren't familiar with creating exploded views, I'll cover that briefly as well. In order to do so, you'll come to the Configuration Manager, right-click on any existing configuration. Currently I only have the default, so that's fine. Right-click on that, and we'll choose New Exploded View. From here, as it says in your how-to, we're going to select a component, and then you would drag the manipulator handle to create an exploded step. What's going on here is we're selecting items here, and then it'll define the direction, which will be the axis you are pulling along, and then the distance. And usually that's just kind of an eyeball. You don't have to type anything in there. And then we have some options down here, and I'll show you another example in just a second of this auto space components after drag. It's really cool in certain scenarios. This select sub-assemblies parts is very important, especially in the case of this shelf for a grill, because down here, the support component, this is all one sub-assembly, and if I did not have this selected, then I could only move this as one chunk. So I'm going to make sure that's on. But I really don't have to worry about most of that down there. It's going to automatically happen. I'm going to start by removing this flathead screw and just drag it, and like I said, usually you just kind of eyeball it. You can select multiple items. I'm not even holding down Control, because really what's happening is I'm selecting for this blue box in the Property Manager, and anytime you have a blue box you don't have to hold Control. Move that up a bit. Try to do this in the right order so that it's impressive at the end. And just choose your axis, and you are selecting the actual arrow, so be sure that when you're creating your exploded views you're careful to select the arrow itself. Just a couple more. Move this one over, move this one over. Wasn't quite in the right order, but you'll get the idea. Everything's now exploded. I'll choose my green check. In order to access this exploded view, you'll have to look under that configuration. So exploded view 1 is located here. I can right click and collapse that. I can also right click and animate either the explode or the collapse. So this is where it would have been really impressive if I did it in the right order. With this, you can also save as an AVI file. You can have it loop. So do the playback and it can loop forward. You can also have it go backwards and forwards, so it'll show the collapse and the explode. So this is kind of a cool option. To take this explode a step further, we can include an explode line sketch, which basically just adds route lines for each component. It's available under the Insert menu, Explode Line Sketch. As I said, it's simply a route line. We're going to choose items to connect, and it's going to, in my case, because I've selected the option, show a line along the XYZ coordinates. So for example, this screw will move through this plank, the corresponding hole in the plank, and then also it should be connected to this support leg. Green check, and I get my route line. Now, if the movement for several components is along the same axis, then you can simply choose the first and the last one, and it'll move through all of those. So here to here. And green check again to accept all of those. And I'll exit my explode line sketch. So that's a nice way to clarify things on a drawing as well. It gives you a much more clear view of how things should go together if you're just looking at a drawing of something. As promised, I'll go ahead and look now at that auto space after drag option. So once again, right click on the configuration, new exploded view. This time I'm going to select everything that I want to be included in this direction. So I can even go ahead and include all of these as well. And down here, using this auto space components after drag, I can drag this out just a little bit, and it'll automatically space those guys. Now they're a little bit far apart right now, so I can use this slider to reel them back in a little. So it's automatically spacing those for me. So that's a nice option. And of course you could go in and finesse them if you wanted to make them look a little bit closer together or something. So that's what the auto space after drag will do. Another nice option when you're dealing with assemblies is to do with mates. So one thing that we can do, it's called a smart mate. You hold down Alt and you drag one face onto another face, it will automatically add a mate. So in this case it's concentric because it's two cylindrical faces. If it were two planar faces, let's say maybe this face and this face, I would get a coincident. So I'm just holding down Alt and dragging one face onto another face. In the case of this assembly, lots and lots of components, 1, 2, 3, 5 of them to be specific, are all going to be related to this cylindrical face. I'm going to have a concentric mate to that face. Rather than selecting this face and this one, green check, this face and this one, green check, etc., etc., within my mate property manager I have an option called multiple mate mode. So if I choose this paperclip with a lightning bolt, my common reference, so the one that everything's going to be related to, is this cylindrical face, and everything else that needs to be related to it I can then just start selecting. And then of course you may have to flip your mate alignment as you go, that's fine. What you don't want to do is click the green check for each one. You want to wait until you've got everything selected until you click the green check. Okay, so I've got all of those selected, green check, green check. Now I can start spacing those components out, but all of them have been mated concentric now. So that's a nice one to know about. It makes things much, much, much faster. If any of you watched my webinar last month, I did an animations presentation, and this was part of that, but it's also good just to know, and I'm not sure that everyone may know about it, so I'm going to go over it again. So I apologize if you've already seen this. This is mostly useful in an animation, but I could see uses for it elsewhere also. Currently what I've got here is just an assembly of a few tanks, and I've got a sketch showing a certain height and a path around those tanks. And what I want to do is kind of a walkthrough, but what I want to show you is the ability to move a component along an entity. in an assembly. So here it's just another component. I've called it a camera sled because it looks like a camera and it was intended for an animation. Really, the beauty comes, let's zoom this out a little bit, maybe in. There we go. So let's say maybe at 6 seconds, I want this camera to move along this entity to this point. So what I can do is go to Move Component, and I want to move along an entity. So you can move along the assembly XYZ. You can move by delta XYZ or to an XYZ position, but I'll choose along entity. Select my item. This is the entity you're going to move along, which is this one. And now when I drag my item, it will only be able to move along there. So it constrains it a little bit just for the ability to move it. Then maybe, let's say at 8 seconds, I want to rotate it. I have the same option for rotate. Okay, so I can rotate about an entity. Which entity? It would be this axis. And then, let's see. There we go. Rotate along there. Maybe at 10 seconds, I want to move again along this path. So just to give you an idea, I'll start back at the beginning and you can see it moving along those entities. So hopefully that will help you, even if you're not doing an animation, if you just need to move something and you want to be very specific, just knowing that there's an option other than free drag, even if you use just along the XYZ of the assembly or something like that, could be helpful. In an assembly also, what's nice is the ability to make groups of selections. In this case, for example, I have 2 batteries on the interior of this flashlight as well as a reflector and a bulb. So what I want to do is either hide or show certain things. Now for a long time, up here at the top of SOLIDWORKS, I see all my menus, I see my open, new, and I see the select button, the arrow, and I don't really think much about it. But if you notice, there is a drop-down arrow there, and if you take a look, there are several selection options that are actually very helpful, especially in an assembly. So for example, internal components. Select internal components. If I choose that and I take a look at my tree, sure enough, 2 batteries, a bulb, and a reflector are selected. I could also maybe right click and I could invert the selection. So I could select everything that's on the outside only. Let's see, what's another one? Also the toolbox. This is a really nice one if you have a large assembly and you need to create a configuration where all of the toolbox components are suppressed or hidden. So you could choose select toolbox. All of the toolbox components will be selected and you can do whatever you need to with those. You can even select items that are mated to a specific thing. So if I select mated to this guy, so everything that has a mate related to this revolve component will be highlighted. Another nice feature is to be able to right click on a subassembly either in the graphics or over here in the tree and select the subassembly and just select the entire thing. Then maybe I want to right click and invert the selection. I want to get everything except for the head assembly. Then I can hide everything. So all I've got for this, maybe a display state or something, all I've got is just the head component. The selection options are really nice. Take a look at those. Really, really helpful. Now maybe I want to take this to the next level, and in the next example I'm going to open this subassembly here and I'm going to create a drawing from it. And in the drawing I'll show you some other nice gems to be aware of. So I hope you've learned a few things or maybe been reminded of a few things, and in just a second we'll talk about the drawings.